Back in the 70s and 80s, eating out wasn't an everyday thing. It was a treat, often reserved for birthdays or a special family outing. And if you were lucky, that treat was a Berni Inn. Walking into one felt like stepping into a proper restaurant, dim lighting, plush seating, and menus filled with the classics: steak and chips, scampi, gammon with a pineapple ring, and the famous prawn cocktail to start. For many, Berni Inn was their very first taste of restaurant dining, a place that made you feel grown up without breaking the bank. Families would dress up a little, mums and dads would order a bottle of wine, and kids would eye the dessert trolley, especially if it carried a Black Forest gâteau. At its peak, there were over 140 Berni Inns across Britain. But as the 90s came along, dining became more casual and the chain slowly faded. By 1995, the last signs disappeared. Still, for those who remember, Berni Inn wasn't just about the food. It was about feeling special, if only for one night. Now, if you grew up in the late 80s or 90s, you probably remember Fatty Arbuckles. It was big, brash, and unapologetically American. From the second you stepped inside, it felt like you'd crossed the Atlantic. Bright neon lights, jukebox tunes, and booths big enough for the whole family. The menu, larger than life. Towering burgers, overflowing fries, giant milkshakes, and desserts that seemed impossible to finish. For British kids, it was their first taste of what they thought America was like. A place where food was fun, messy, and absolutely massive. Families loved it for birthday parties and weekend treats. Kids loved the milkshakes, dads loved the portions. Mums, well, they probably just loved that everyone went home full and happy. At its height, there were over 30 Fatty Arbuckles across the country. But as health trends shifted and sleeker American chains moved in, Arbuckle started to feel like a relic. By the early 2000s, it had all but vanished. Still, for those who went, it was unforgettable. A taste of America on a British high street. Long before motorway services looked like shopping malls, families setting off on long car journeys hoped to see one thing: the smiling red and yellow face of a happy eater. For kids in the back seat, spotting that sign was almost as exciting as reaching the destination. Inside, the menu was simple but comforting. Bacon sandwiches, sausages and mash, jacket potatoes and fry-ups available any time of day. There was always something for everyone, and outside, a little play area to run off some energy before piling back into the car. The magic of Happy Eater wasn't in fine dining, it was in the memories. Sitting around a table with your family, colouring in the kids' menu, or choosing a pudding before the journey continued. Peaking at around 75 restaurants, the chain couldn't compete with the fast food giants. By the late 90s, the smiling faces had all disappeared from Britain's roadsides. But ask anyone who grew up in the 80s or 90s, and they'll tell you, spotting that Happy Eater logo on a long drive was enough to make the whole car cheer. Before Domino's and Pizza Hut ruled the high street, there was Pizzaland. For many families in the 70s and 80s, it was their first ever experience of dining out on pizza. And walking into Pizzaland felt exciting. The smell of garlic bread wafting through the air, the laminated menus filled with names you could barely pronounce, and the thrill of ordering a whole pizza to yourself. The menu was simple but dependable. Margherita, pepperoni, Hawaiian, if you fancied something daring. There were pasta dishes, side salads, and of course desserts that made the trip extra special. Pizzaland wasn't trying to be authentic Italian, it was family-friendly, affordable and fun. At its peak, there were around 140 Pizzaland restaurants across the UK. It was the go-to spot for birthday meals, first dates, and Friday night family outings. But as the 90s arrived, bigger international chains muscled in. Pizzaland couldn't keep up, and by the mid-90s it had all but disappeared. Still, for a whole generation, Pizzaland was where we first discovered how magical a hot cheesy pizza could be. Few names stir up as much nostalgia as Little Chef. If you grew up in Britain, chances are you stopped at one on a long road trip. That red and white sign meant one thing: a break from the motorway, a fry-up, and maybe even a pudding before heading back on your journey. Inside, the vibe was pure comfort. The Olympic breakfast was legendary, a plate so big it could barely fit on the table. Then there were beans on toast, sausage and mash, and mugs of steaming hot tea poured endlessly by waitresses who seemed to have worked there forever. For kids, it was the excitement of stretching your legs and colouring in a kid's menu. At its peak, there were over 400 Little Chefs dotted along A roads. They were part of the British landscape. But as fast food chains took over service stations, Little Chef faded. By 2018, the last one closed its doors. Even so, for millions of families, Little Chef wasn't just a pit stop. It was part of the journey itself. If you ever visited central London in the 80s or 90s, you probably ended up in a Garfunkel's. They weren't flashy, but they had something for everyone. Full English breakfasts, burgers and pasta, roasts and hearty desserts. The restaurants always had a comforting feel. Booths that invited long conversations and menus thick enough to satisfy even the fussiest eater. For tourists and Londoners alike, Garfunkel's was a safe bet. You knew what you'd get. Big portions, reasonable prices, no need to dress up. It was the sort of place you'd stop after a day of sightseeing. But as dining trends shifted toward more specialised restaurants, Garfunkel's started to feel old-fashioned. After the pandemic hit, most of its remaining branches closed quietly. Today, Garfunkel's is gone, but it remains a memory of simpler days, when one menu really could please everyone. In the late 80s and early 90s, deep pan pizza was the place to be if you were hungry for something hearty. Forget thin crusts. This was unapologetically thick, doughy, and smothered in cheese. Walking into a deep pan pizza meant stepping into a world where bigger was better. Families would squeeze into booths, kids' eyes widening at the size of the slices, while parents dug into all-you-can-eat buffets. It wasn't about authenticity. It was about comfort, filling your belly, and maybe sneaking back for seconds. But as British tastes evolved toward lighter pizzas, deep pan began to feel out of step. By the late 90s, the brand had quietly disappeared. Still, for those who grew up in that era, one bite of thick, cheesy pizza can transport you straight back to a deep pan booth. Long before McDonald's and Burger King, there was Wimpy, the true pioneer of the British burger. Founded in the 1950s, its red and white branding was a familiar sight on nearly every high street by the 70s. Walking into a Wimpy felt exciting but approachable. Unlike fast food chains, this was sit-down dining. Waitresses brought your food on plates with proper cutlery. The Wimpy Bender, a frankfurter curled into a circle, was a rite of passage, and milkshakes came thick and frothy. At its peak, there were over 500 Wimpy restaurants in Britain. But as American fast food giants arrived, Wimpy slowly lost its grip. While a handful still exist today, the high street giant we all remember is a ghost. For many, it was the first taste of a burger and chips, eaten not from a paper bag, but on a plate. If you went shopping in the 80s or 90s, the smell of a food court often led to one place, Spudulike. Founded in 1974, it was built on a brilliantly simple idea: a perfect, fluffy jacket potato with any topping you could dream of. Chili con carne, baked beans and cheese, prawn mayonnaise. The choice was yours. For hungry shoppers, it was the ultimate comfort food. It felt healthier than a burger, more filling than a sandwich, and was always served piping hot. At its peak, with over 50 outlets, Spudulike was a fixture in shopping centres up and down the country. The original company eventually faded in 2019, but for a generation, the name Spudulike is synonymous with the simple, satisfying joy of a perfectly loaded spud. If you worked in central London in the early 2000s, chances are you grabbed lunch at Fuzzy's Grub. The idea was simple but brilliant. Roast dinners served in takeaway boxes or sandwiches. Imagine pork with crispy crackling, roast potatoes, gravy-soaked stuffing and veg, all crammed into a hot, messy and utterly satisfying lunch. Fuzzy's was loved by office workers. The queues at lunchtime were proof that people wanted more than a boring sandwich. They wanted Sunday dinner in the middle of a hectic weekday. It was cheap, cheerful and unapologetically filling. But like many small chains, Fuzzy's couldn't keep pace with rising rents and changing diets. Slowly, its shops began to disappear. Still, for those who tasted it, Fuzzy's Grub is remembered as the place that proved roast dinners really could fit in a box. And there we have it, 10 restaurants that once defined British dining but have now vanished forever. From Berni Inns to Little Chef, Wimpy to Spudulike, they weren't just places to eat. They were part of our family outings, our birthdays, our holidays, and our everyday lives. Even though the signs have faded and the doors have closed, the memories remain. The smell of chips frying, the excitement of eating out, the joy of a milkshake or dessert you couldn't get at home. But now it's over to you. Which of these restaurants do you remember best? Did you have a family tradition of stopping at Little Chef? Or maybe your first burger at Wimpy? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please like this video, subscribe to Retro Britannia, and join us for more nostalgic journeys into Britain's past. Because while the restaurants may be gone, the memories are here to stay.